Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Affamie History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast, and if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you. For coming on to the podcast and to speak about Caribbean foods or foodways, and to be able to give you a perspective on things. So first of all, before we start, I'll have you introduce yourself to the audience.
Hello, I'm Chef Keisha Griggs. I'm currently located in Houston, but I am by way of Trinidad and Tobago. I have a catering company here. I also have a restaurant that is Caribbean based. Catering is everything. I'm touting myself as a food activist. I teach a lot about sustainable, locally sustainable food, as well as Caribbean food as well, and the ties of Caribbean food to our African culture or our African heritage. So that's kind of the gist of me. I love food. I love talking about food. I love talking about the history of food. I'm learning something new every day. And so I'm very excited that you asked me to join you on this podcast today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Chef Griggs. And as well, what kind of, really drew you to specialize in Caribbean foods and foodways?
I'm Trinidadian, and Trinidadians, I'm, eating was a part of is eating is such a force in our culture, as I'm sure it is with many Caribbean cultures. And, my mother is the cooker of the family. So any Christmases, birthdays, get-togethers, my mom's in the kitchen cooking all of it, whipping it up. So by happenstance and by default, I was her little mini sous chef, right? So if I come home and there's a bowl, big plastic Pyrex bowl on the table with, celery and onions and bell peppers and thyme, I was cutting that shit up, whether I wanted to or not. I was in there cutting it up and helping her and watching pots and eating a little as we went. And the fellowship that happens with women in the kitchen is something that um, is ingrained, and it was always a joyous thing, right? It was never something like that seemed laborious. Was, oh, I gotta cook dinner. It was like, all right, let's throw some music on, and let's all be in here, and one person's doing this, another person's doing that. And at the time you're a child, you want to go play, so you're like, oh, cut this shit. And then you're done with it. But then halfway through you start smelling the smells, and you come back, and you're kind of just watching the gossip happening in the kitchen, and the men watching football or the men playing football, because football for us is a huge thing here in the States. Soccer is not so much, but everywhere else it is. So either watching or playing football, and it just became more of a fellowship than just dinner. So by happenstance I just fell into it, and then to make it my profession, it was just not only the teaching people, because you teach people via food, because people don't know their way. People think they know, but they don't. And so introducing new flavors and new techniques and or new ingredients is something that I enjoyed, and I like making people happy. I like creating. Eating is the only thing that we do that ignites all five of our senses. And so to be able to create something that can do that, and create memories, like there's a lot, we don't recognize how much food memory we have. You can be walking down the street and you smell something and it takes you back to 25 years ago when you were at so-and-so, and you had so-and-so on the street corner at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? So food is something that transcends, that I think is pretty cool that I get to do this for a living. So that's what drew me to specialize in Caribbean cuisine and to represent Caribbean cuisine at a at a I'll use the word gourmet, but
Mhm.
I like the idea of playing around with this similar flavors presented differently. So that's kind of where my chutzpah for cooking comes from.
No, no, thank you for that because I mean, you're right. Smelling something will take you definitely down a different memory lane and bring back good memories as well. So,
Hmm.
with Caribbean cuisine, it is incredibly diverse. Would you be able to provide an overview of the different culinary styles and influences that define the Caribbean cuisines?
So I can only speak to Trinidad because that's where I'm from. So I am blessed to be from the beautiful Isles of TNT,
Mm-hmm.
because we have and pull cultural influences from a lot of different places. There's the West Indian because we are considered West Indian.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an enormous Indian population, and we get to pull from that. There is an Asian, we get to pull from Asia as well. We get to pull from Africa. We get to pull from the European aspect of Trinidad. So Trinidad it's a melting pot of flavors um, that I get to play with. And I tell people, like, I'm from a very diverse country where I get to pull from Indian, African, Asian, um, European, British. I get to pull from all of those different ingredients, techniques, and spices and flavor profiles that my menus get to be a little bit of everything. We have a vegetable lo mein on my menu at my restaurant, which is a Trinidadian Chinese vegetable lo mein, well, chicken lo mein, and then we also
Yeah.
have curry goat. We have doubles, so we have, but then I'm in America, so we also have sweet potato, right? So like, but sweet potatoes here are different than sweet potatoes in Africa and in the Caribbean. So it's just being able to um, play around with those flavors. I'm really lucky to be from such a diverse culinary landscape.
And all those different flavors. So, in your experience, what role does food play in preserving and celebrating Caribbean culture and heritage?
It plays a huge part, right? Because you hear curry, and here you hear curry and you think Asian,
Mm-hmm.
right? You think the sweet and the green curries whereas in Trinidad, Chiefs is made in Trinidad and it's a completely different, savorier, less fragrant curry flavor profile. And I think as food professionals, it's by happenstance, you're teaching people your culture by way of food. Um, I'm in America, so nobody really considers a garbanzo or a chana or a chickpea or they'll be like, oh, I don't like that. And I'm like, oh, why don't you just try it? And because it's in the presentation that it's in, it'll change a person's mind completely. But that is we get to expose people to things that they've never had before. Um, we have tamarind for our doubles at my
Mm-hmm.
restaurant, right? So, what's a tamarind sauce? What's a culantro chutney? What is culantro? Oh, well, culantro is actually cilantro. It's just the cousin of cilantro, but we call it shadow benny, right? So I can't put shadow benny on my
Mm-hmm.
menu, but I put a cilantro pesto, right? They get that, but when they see because we have the plant at the restaurant and they're like, what is that? I'm like, well, that's what we use for our chutney. It's called cilantro, but really it's called shadow benny from where I'm from. But in the States, it's cilantro to you or coriander to you, because coriander is the seed of cilantro. So being able to educate people on the different flavor profiles that are the same but different um, is one of the ways that I incorporate the history of Caribbean food into like every day. Um, you know, yeah, like a bajin or a merengue is an eggplant, right? We have a eggplant choka at the restaurant, and it's a dip, right? It's an eggplant dip. Choka is not a thing; it's a technique, right? But choka is the same thing that is the same technique that Asians use when you pour hot oil over aromatics. When you pour hot oil over green onions and garlic and ginger and chili in Asia, that is a choka. right? But in Trinidad, choka is the same exact thing, burning the eggplant and then pouring hot oil and thinly sliced onions and garlic, mashing it all up and then pouring hot oil over it is the same thing. You're bringing out the aromatics. So I talk a lot about the similarities in our techniques, and it's just called something different around the globe. So just giving people good food, making good food approachable, and they don't even know they're getting a lesson, but they definitely are.
Yes,
And then
exactly.
explaining it to them. You know, people come in and Americans have no idea what a double is, right?
Yep.
Doubles is a big deal. You know, when you find doubles or you find a double lady or man someplace, you go there. But I have Americans that walk into my restaurant and they order it because of the description. What's a barra? Oh, a barra is a fried bread. What do you mean like a fried? I call it like a Caribbean taco is what because I'm in
Okay.
Texas.
Yeah.
So everybody can relate to a taco. And I have to explain to people how to eat it. You know, I like this is a, you know, a Caribbean street food that's extremely popular in my country, and you eat it like a taco and the china, and I call it china, and they're like, what? And I'm like, garbanzo beans, that's what china is, with turmeric, and they're like, turmeric, yes, turmeric, and you put that in there, and you add your tamarind sauce, and we have them kind of on display on my thing, and I show them what the tamarind is, um, and most people, but tamarind is also something that Hispanics know everything about, right? Because Hispanics use tamarind all the time, and by way of candy, by way of sauces, by way of, but Indians do as well. So it's just being able to play off of that, and the cucumber relish goes on top, and they're like, oh, eat it like a taco, because if not, then they'll just cut it
Yes.
like a steak and eat it separately. I'm like, no, no, no. On the side of the road, you've got like a paper, and you've got to like fold that paper up and tilt your head over to the side and eat it that way. I presented it in a very civilized
Yeah.
situation. So, by way of cooking authentically Caribbean food is how I continue to tell the story of my culture and expose people to the story of my culture.
Because I mean, it just shows the similarities between them two as well,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is fabulous. And then, you know, could you just go, I guess, to some of the essential ingredients and spices that are quite essential to the Caribbean cooking, and how do these ingredients, you know, contribute to the unique flavors of the Caribbean dish?
Curry.
Mhm.
Curry is,
Yeah.
you know, thyme, um, habanero, Scotch bonnet,
Mhm.
bay leaf is a big deal. Garlic and ginger as well. Flour, because, you know, like we talked earlier, everything has, you know, a bread component. Um, Provisions, so your plantains, your cassava, which cassava and yucca is the same thing, but it's, you know, it's said differently,
Yes.
because you can go to an Asian market, they have cassava, but they call it yucca. You can go to the African market, cassava. You can go to the Hispanic market, and it's yucca, right? So, but we, you know, we call that provisions, because, you know, some green plantain, some edos, which is taro here, but we call it edos, um, and, you know, dumplings, which is flour. Um, those are, I think those are like the mainstays. Of course, there's salt butter, but that's like a whole different thing. So that's more of a man-made condiment that has the flavors of turmeric, um, for sure. Well, saffron, because saffron and turmeric
Mhm.
is interchangeable. Um, so those, I think, is the basis. You know, the green seasoning, which is, you know, cilantro, celery, garlic, and green onions, you know, blended up like a sofrito, which is the same thing that, you know, Hispanics use as their base of things as a sofrito. They're both green. They all have pretty much the same uh, ingredients, but theirs is called sofrito, which is the base for beans and rice and stews, and ours is green seasoning, which is the same. So there's technique that is the same along, you know, the different cultures. Same technique, just something different with just a tinge and a change based off of the region of the ingredient. So I think those are the mainstays that, if you're going to be cooking some curry chicken or some goat, or if you're going to be stewing some chicken or beef, or if you're going to be do a fish broth or oil down, those are all ingredients that you'll use. Or oil down is the glutinous of the pig is where the oil down comes from. But then there's vegans who have no idea, like will never put a pigtail in their oil down, and it's just the provisions in the corn. So,
and those provisions, that's what sometimes only people can eat, is just the provisions.
yeah,
Right?
it's just the provisions.
And that's
And I
of itself.
it is, and I call it ital food.
Mm-hmm.
But the ital food is tied to a religion, right? Because
Yes.
that is Rastafarian. That is something that is, so it's just very interesting when you think about like how we consider foods in different ways as a culture.
Yeah, I guess it's just I guess how you look at it, right? So, and then with your culinary journey, how has it allowed you to explore and experiment with these traditional Caribbean recipes and ingredients? And are there any innovative approaches or fusions that you've produced in your cooking?
Um, I do definitely teeter on experimental things when I'm doing. Um, I do a bunch of different refined course dinner situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to introduce, let's say, a corn soup, or we'll say doubles, right? So I do a thing with pan puri, which is an Indian puffed ball and pan puri means water, to water. But you'll see it in a lot of Indian places. It's like a little round ball. It's crispy, and on the inside, it's like fana, and there's like a water, and it's like a one bite situation. So I like merging the flavor, or for instance, I like merging the flavor profile of something that's so familiar differently. So I'll do that. Or during festival season last year, I wanted to do something that represented where I'm from and where I am, which is in Houston. But I also want to make sure that I incorporate Trinidadian or Caribbean flavors. So here there is a Mexican dish called sopas, right? So sopas um, is masa flour, corn flour, and it's just a deep fried, and it's this crispy, um, like a thick, it's like about that big but in round, and you put traditionally it's like ground beef and beans and avocado, but I wanted to do it a Caribbean way, so I did curry chickpeas, because I tend to do most things on the outside for vegetarians, because I feel like when you're at a festival everyone can eat it, because the meat eaters will eat it and the vegetarians have an option to eat it. So I do like with the curry chickpeas and all the same condiments that you would get on a doubles, but on a coconut sopa. So when people say that, they're like, coconut sopa, like what? I'm like, yeah, that's, it's a sopa, but I made it with coconut and coconut milk. And it's the same, instead of water, I use coconut milk, and it's deep fried, and it was absolutely divine. But those are different ways I incorporate different cultures and different techniques into expressing my Caribbean heritage.
Very nice. That sounds very delicious too. I
I
know that
mean, you can do the science food too, right? You
yeah.
can do the spears, and you can do the foams, and you can do the gelays, and I do all of that as well, but that's more on the technical side. I like merging different cultural things um, on top of just the technical side.
No, I mean that's great because I mean, coconut, most people just use coconut for one particular thing and won't even think outside of the box to say to use it the way that you've used it, right? So it's good to know that it can be fused, it can be used in um, different ways, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to just what you've probably grown up with on how you know that you normally would use it. And, on that, because you mentioned before in terms of with, growing up and being in the kitchen and being as a sous chef, family and community are really central in the Caribbean culture. So how has this influenced the way meals are prepared and shared and celebrated in Caribbean households and communities?
I think a part of why it's when growing up, cooking was such an event, if you will, is because there is it really just stems from love, right? And I truly believe that if you love what you're doing, you taste it. I think that we're kind of in the generation where cooking is a chore. Cooking is seen as like washing dishes and doing laundry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not it's a survival thing versus a pleasure thing, right? We have to eat, right, to survive, versus let's go eat to enjoy. Or I feel like there's been a shift in the appreciation of sustenance and the appreciation of fellowshipping together. To, you know, back in the days growing up, our parents went to other people's house and ate food. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody brought food, and it was like a get together. Like everyone communed around the table. Some of the biggest, historical events happened around a dinner table. So the idea that, I mean, Caribbeans are inclusive in the fact that food is fellowship, and food cooked with love is everlasting. So I just love what I do, and I love to cook, and I love to, like I said earlier, create a memory for my guests and for the people that I cook for, even if it's like the best grilled cheese sandwich you've ever had, right? So it really is the love, because I don't remember my mom ever complaining about being the person that cooked all the food. Like, I don't I don't I don't recall. Now she's trying to pass the buck, and I'm like, no, ma'am. But I don't remember her being in a place where it was a laborious thing to cook dinner for people coming over, or the family. Because we have a big family, and my mother is an amazing cook, but then also my dad is an amazing cook, and he cooks for, their Caribbean men when they work a lot away from home. So they'll get a job and, they live in Houston and they'll get a job in Arizona, or overseas, but it's all the same type of work. And my dad would be the one, that everybody on Sunday came over, and they'll all buy the food and just give it to my dad to cook. So I get it both ways. When my dad's here, he's like, I'm going to cook you dinner. And, he was here a couple of months ago, well, about a month ago, and I don't remember what I was making, but he was standing over me. He's like, you put that in your callaloo? I was like, if you don't get out of my kitchen, I don't put that in my callaloo. I'm like, oh boy. So, but I get it both ways, cooking. And I think it's something that they both share, is that they like being the person to bring joy and make people happy. And food makes people happy. People do little dances when they're having good food. When they taste something and it's good, they do a little jiggle. So I think that is something I get on both sides. So here I am.
Yeah, it's a real labor of love, as you said. So it is what it is, right? So, and then of course, just with food in general, that especially in the Caribbean, that so many dishes are known by different names by each island, but they're the same thing. Would you have any examples that of some of these dishes that would be, as one way in Trinidad and Tobago and something different in a different island?
I'm going to be honest, I'm not as well versed as to the different types of dishes, more so than ingredients.
Okay.
So, and I learned that, via, like we were talking earlier about my grandmother. I was like, when I go to the store with her, she'll say something, or she'll ask me to bring something that, like, she'll say, is there any Karali by you? So Karali to us is bitter melon to everybody else. And that is something that, I just grew up with knowing Karali. And then I remember I saw it for the first time at, like I said, we have a very eclectic a diverse community here. So, you can go to a local store and they'll have like, Chinese eggplant. They'll have a bitter melon. They'll have Chinese okra, what we call okra ocho, right? But that's okra, right? We call eggplant malenge, but that's eggplant. We call avocado zabaka, but it's avocado still. So those are the terms that I grew up with, and it wasn't until I like got into food and it became an adult that I realized like, oh wait, but this is not, this is not avocado, it's zabaka, because that's what we grew up hearing. And zabaka is something that is salt and pepper, like it's on the table with every meal. Eating avocado has just been like I for my entire life. But like, and like I said earlier, like, cilantro, culantro, shadow benny. Shadow benny is what we call culantro, but here they call it cilantro. We talked about chana and chickpeas and garbanzo. That's something that is 1, 2, 3, the same thing. So split peas is yellow. I think they call it yellow split peas here. Lentils is lentils. But more so, I mean, like we talked a little bit earlier, rice and peas is universal to our African, Caribbean, Hispanic, Native American culturals tie into. We all make a version of peas and rice, where you call it paella, you call it and add seafood, or you call it pilau, or you call it red beans and rice, because in the South, red beans and rice is a thing. Just different, add pork and you have red beans and rice, add coconut milk and you have pilau, add tomato seafood and you have paella, but it's all, the same arroz con pollo, rice and peas and chicken. So it's all the same thing that we're just calling it differently, but that's because technique and ingredients all came by way. So
No, that's so true. But and then continue on this theme of foods that are linked now back to the continent of Africa, because I think we don't necessarily sometimes realize, because I know we were talking before recording that a lot of foods are linked back to the continent, and I think
most food,
yeah,
most food is linked back to the continent. Dr. Jessica Harris has a really amazing book called High on the Hog. Have you read that?
No, I haven't read that.
So that book traces the origins of food and ingredients in America by way of Americas. And it speaks to how certain things, rice, watermelon, okra, even corn landed here by way of the transatlantic slave trade. It's actually a very amazing book just to grasp how influential Africa is in the current day culinary landscape. And I learned a lot from reading that book, and I was just kind of blown away. One, it's completely historical. There's a Netflix special that's called High on the Hog, but it doesn't even skim the surface of that book. Like, I read that book and I was like, I wish I was a Hollywood producer. I would take 5 things from every chapter and make a movie series about this. It is an amazing body of work. I had an opportunity meeting Jessica, so I was like fangirling out, and I was like, "You're an amazing person." It's a book that kind of outlines how much of an impact our ancestors made by way of sneaking and keeping the culture alive no matter what the cost. Collard greens and creating meals out of necessity, and making businesses out of it. Like, I never even knew that there was, you hear this such a one-sided story about Africans in America during that time, during slavery, but there was a lot of Africans and African Americans that took that and made businesses and to see what they've done to, watermelon, and demonized it and turned it against us when we are the reason why there's watermelon
Yeah.
here in this country. Giving rice to another culture, the Asian culture, when rice is, the Gullah Geechee still are immense rice producers, right? Um, Sorrel, which is something that we drink as sorrel, but here it's called hibiscus, right? And that's a huge Hispanic influence. It's something that you find in every, Mexican grocery store and or restaurant. They have a version of hibiscus tea and a hibiscus drink, but we call that sorrel, which I sell at my restaurant, and I make it the way that my grandmother made it, with bay leaf and clove. Callaloo. I know that Jamaicans have their version of callaloo. We have a version of callaloo, which is, ocho and spinach, or callaloo leaf, which one of my customers grows, and he brings me his callaloo leaf because, he grows in his name is Henry. He's like an older gentleman. He has a business up the street. And when he found out I was a Trinidadian restaurant or a Caribbean restaurant, he brings me pepper sauce and he brings me scotch bonnet because he grows things. And he has lamb. I'm sorry, he has goat, which I always threaten to like kidnap his goat and turn it into delicious curry. But he brings me, callaloo leaf, which is a little difficult to grow in Houston's weather. But we also use Malabar spinach that grows in abundance here. So there's a lot of things that tie back to Africa that we still use here. Like we talked earlier, provisions, taro, eros, cassava, green plantain, all of those things we grows on the continent. We're just because cassava is fufu, right? All right, it's just pounded to a nauseum, fufu, which creates the starch. So we're eating the same thing, just differently. And fufu is the bread of Africa, right? It's the thing that you eat all of your food with. We also eat it the same way. And most people don't realize it's just like a potato, it's so, at my restaurant, instead of potato, we use cassava. We do a garlic cassava instead of having mashed potatoes. Again, introducing Caribbean flavors and Caribbean ingredients, similar but different. Everyone eats potatoes. And so when they ask, what is this cassava? I said, oh, it's a potato. And they're like, oh, it's a garlic potato? Yeah, it's like a garlic potato. So just boiling it the same exact way, peeling it and boiling it the same exact way, making chips out of it, making chips out of plantain. Those are things like we talked earlier about how I use different techniques for ingredients that are familiar to my country.
And definitely just to put a different twist on things so people can relate to what they're eating and not, be necessarily put off by it. So kudos to you for doing that. And, for food tourism, since that is on the rise and people are, they're interested in exploring different cuisines. How can someone, fully immerse themselves in Caribbean culinary experience, either through travel or at home?
I think that Caribbean food makers are being a lot more direct with creating foods that they grew up with. So not whitewashing the flavors of things to appease different palates. And I think that the best way for people who don't have the opportunity to go to the Caribbean, there is a Caribbean celebration pretty much everywhere. Houston has a Caribbean carnival, Miami has one, Atlanta has one, California has one, Seattle, New Orleans, New York, find a festival is what I would say. It kicks off in February with the Caribbean, the Trinidadian Carnival, but Canada has a huge one. London has Notting Hill. There's Caribbean, because we're good time people, right? We like to have a good time. We like to celebrate our culture no matter where you are. I beg you to, name. You're going to see a flag in a car. on the seat cover, hanging from the, that's just how we are. I mean, there's a flag in my office. We're proud people and we like to promote our culture. And because of that, we celebrate, and most everywhere has a Caribbean festival of some sort. So I would say if you want a good immersive experience, is to attend a festival in your local. Atlanta has one. Like I've you know, all the small islands will have theirs. Barbados will have theirs. Jamaica has a Caribbean carnival. Um, so I would say that if you want to dive into a different experience that's very authentic, to attend the carnival. Like that's because the carnival will have music, it will have the vibe, it will have the food, it will have the drinks. And that's the most tangible way that I like expose people to um, our culture, because it's very unique.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Very unique, very, very, very unique. And there's an etiquette to it, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
just can't come in there acting all wassy and unruly. Like there's a definite, cultural shift when you enter a space that is a Caribbean based environment, and here in Houston, they have Houston, like I told you, is a huge Caribbean population, and we have our Caribbean Carnival. And once it started advertising on local radio, it was a different crowd, but that crowd had to be taught. Like you can't just grab up on. You can't just, if a girl comes and she went on you and she walk away, that's just part of it. Like you don't need to be around. It was very different. And it was fun. Well, some of it was interesting, learning and teaching a different culture as to how to act within. But I think that the most tangible way for people to be immersed in a Caribbean environment is to attend a carnival. Not all the parties, because carnival comes with like a string of day to night parties, but it also includes the culinary and the food that we have, for sure.
Part of that celebration. And then the health and wellness, of course, is gaining importance in our society. How are traditional Caribbean dishes adapted, if any, to meet modern health conscious trends without compromising taste and authenticity?
I think that Caribbeans cook their food. And cooking food for yourself, I think, just in and of itself promotes health and wellness, because you know what the ingredients are. You might not know where that chicken came from, but you know what you're putting on the chicken. You know that you're cleaning that chicken with some lime or some vinegar or some lemon juice before you're cooking it, as opposed to going out in these streets and eating just about anywhere. I think because we cook our food is how we have maintained and promoted health and wellness, because like I said, what's in it. When you're eating out, and I'm a restaurateur, so I'm not knocking it. But when you're eating out, or you're eating fast food, you don't have any idea what that's from. And when my grandmother grew her food for as long as I've known her, she's had Karaili, she had okra, she had callaloo, she had, what else did Granny have? She had green onion, she had onions, she grew carrots. Like those are things that I remember her just going out and picking and bringing inside and cooking for us. So I think that whereas my mom, she's trying to conform. She's an immigrant in this country. She doesn't want to cook, callaloo, even though she did, but she's going to throw a quiche in there. And we're like, what is this? What is this egg-based? What is this? But corned beef and rice and spinach was something that we grew up eating. That is a very Caribbean thing, out of the can with the little key thing turning around. Which in retrospect was probably terrible for us to be eating, right? Because corned beef is not beef out of a can. I mean, now you're just like, what in the world? Salmon out of a can. My first experience was, my is salmon and rice and cabbage, and that salmon came, and I dare to say didn't start eating fresh salmon till I was a whole adult, like adult. Um, which I like that's a realization right now. Like, wow, that was like
That's what we
normal,
eat. That's what we eat.
but that was what we ate. Now I can, have fresh salmon and make the same meal. But growing up, that's what you had. But again, it goes back to cooking. Like, yes, that salmon's coming out of a can, but that's fresh tomato, fresh onion, fresh garlic, curry, green seasoning that's going into that thing. So I think that Caribbeans, by way of the fact that we still have our population, we cook. We cook our own food. It's very rare, and if we ain't cooking it, we going to somebody else that done cooked it, right? Because
Yes,
the mad call of who cooking this Sunday, and somebody gonna show up, or someone say, "Oh, I'm cooking. I'm doing it Sunday," blah, 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 and they'll go. And so even if you're not cooking, somebody is cooking, and you just go take your plate, and your plastics, and you pack up for the
exactly.
and then you carry on. But like I believe that, and then two, we are heavy fish eaters. We're heavy vegetable eaters. There's always a salad. There's always like I said, an avocado. There's always freshly made bread. There's not things that come out of plastic so much. So by happenstance of our cultural background, we cook. So I think that lends to a healthier, lifestyle. Dal and rice, fish, sardines, smoke herring, like red snapper, shark and bake. These are things that are fresh and that are healthy. Of course, there's, blood sausage and pig foot and chicken foot sauce, but that's in moderation.
That's not an everyday thing.
It's not an everyday thing. So I think that that's how we lend ourselves to maintaining a healthier lifestyle, is because I think that Caribbeans cook more.
No, definitely, that is definitely true.
And because you got to think about it, it's kind of shunned on if you don't know how to cook.
Exactly.
And then we know the family members that just can't cook, but it's kind of like shunned upon to not know how to, throw some pilau together, or make some stewed chicken, or throw a callaloo on the stove in a pinch. So I think that, and then people are leaning back towards, seasonal, non-frozen, non-can of, here in America, they trying to kill this girl. So, it's a matter of, I'm not trying to get this preserved, whatever it is. And why have I had it in my cabinet for a month and it's still, it ain't got no fuzz on it. Like, I don't understand. So I think a lot of people are leaning more, or starting to lean towards, and like I said earlier, our parents, the generation before us, they're older now, and they're going to the doctor, and the doctor's saying that hypertension, and then that diabetes is due to your terrible diet, and they wanted to simulate, like they want to cook American food, and American food is processed. The fact that there's things here that Canada won't even consider selling is an atrocity. There's poison in everything. Not to be a doomsdayer, but
no, but it's just really making sure that what you're eating is real food, and to be able to know what you're eating and how you're cooking it.
Consciously aware of, like we talked earlier, that here the grocery stores, they've eliminated half of the produce section for ready-made products. So, it'll be a salmon with butter, some sort of herb butter, and an asparagus that you just stick in your air fryer or your microwave or your oven. But what is in that for it to preserve sitting on the shelf for a couple of days? There's chicken with grill marks on it, and some sort of sauce that will melt on, and it's like, what's happening here? And it's a little scary, but in the same wave of people that look at that as a convenient thing, there's a wave of people that is like, I don't think so. I want to know where my stuff comes from. And butchers, it's interesting because the community that my restaurant is in is considered a food desert, right? It's considered it's considered and it's, I tell people, I don't ever use that word because the people that live in this community do not consider this community as a food desert. They get their meat from the local butcher. It might be the ghetto to you, but they know where their meat comes from, and they stand in that line and they get the sausage that's made fresh in-house, and they get the meats that we're watching them butcher the primal parts down. Just like our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers, before communities of color were degraded and destroyed, they were self-sufficient and they had their own everything that was sourced locally. So when I'm talking to people about the community that I'm in, it's like, don't call it a food desert. Don't call it that, because the people that live there don't consider there's food all on every corner. The kind of food is different, but there's food and resources on every corner. And it's more people going to buy their meats and their proteins from a butcher that's farm or ranch is, an hour away from the city, versus going to Kroger and we don't know where that meat came from. They might buy that meat and fry it and smother it, but it doesn't matter. That meat is sourced local. Right. So I think that, there's a misconception of in general, when it comes to certain communities, as far as accessibility of food. And I think that we're starting to lean back towards growing our own food. And, once you grow food, you can feed a block. You can feed your whole neighborhood with one house that's growing food in their backyard, because food grows in abundance. So.
Know, but thank you so much, Chef Griggs, for coming on to the podcast, and
thank you for having me
to speak about Caribbean foodways and knowing that it's part of our history. So
it is. It's part of everyone's history. It's not just ours. Africa touched everywhere. People of African descent touched everywhere, and they brought their agricultural and cultural influences to every facet of this globe. And I'm excited to keep talking about the fact that, Black food is not a monolith. We come from all over the place, but we're all eating the same thing. Just a little bit different, just a different spice here and there. So to be able to continue to talk about the fact that, we're such a diverse entity, but we're all the same. And that's not just with Africans and African Americans and Africans, it's with Asians, it's with Hispanic. Any immigrant country is eating pretty much the same things, just differently. So I'm really excited to talk about that at any opportunity.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you.